A giant Punctibyte welcome to all of you. As we head into the week of April 7th, things are a little bit more busy than usual, and we've already seen that because of the stress of this time of year, we've had a little bit of fallout in the lab, and I want to talk a little bit about that coming up. But since we have so much to say, I'm going to try to keep things hopping, and I'm going to try to interrupt this at times with some interesting stuff. So to start out with, let's talk about poop. Yes, poop, because we really need to associate our upcoming lectures about water quality and water treatment with the idea that we can tap into this as a renewable resource of energy. That is to say that when our wastewater treatment enters into the wastewater treatment plant, it is filled with potential fuel because all of the solid organics in that can be, as you know, degraded through both mixed aerobic and mixed anaerobic digestions by bacteria, and the anaerobic treatment of this solid organic waste can lead to, of course, by methanogens, the production of methane gas. Not all wastewater treatment plants are tapping into this sort of potential energy, but this is a kind of interesting article that was recent about a car being produced by Hyundai. I don't know why the theme of cars lately, but in any case, this is a poop-fueled car. That is to say that the methane gas that can come from wastewater treatment can be used to fuel this particular automobile. So kind of a cool idea for sustainable energy source coming from obviously a very sustainable source. We need to talk about our scheduling for the week, and we're looking at a few things up and coming. First of all, we're going to be covering the EPIC Immunology Lab on either Monday or Tuesday. We're also looking at water microbiology, as I alluded to, and then finally soil microbiology. We are into the heart of our applied and environmental microbiology section, and we'll end off this whole section and, of course, the semester by talking about food microbiology. Take note that Schwa and Rob are up for Open Lab, so if you guys can't make it, and I know you have a little bit of variable schedules, try to find somebody to be there. Thank you to all of you who have been pinch hitters for people covering their open labs for them. We also have Easter holiday coming up the next Friday, so we need to make sure that students are fully aware of that, and to try to get them going on their skills tests. I've noticed that some of them have already done a lot of those. The last skills test won't really be possible for them until we do Lab 24, so some of them will have to finish up one skill going into the final week of lab. Do let them know that the 24th and the 23rd and 24th are days that they are able to do those skills assessment, but on that day they will not have more than one attempt. So while we'll be there and ready to help them through that, we will not allow them to have more than one attempt on that day. Okay, that being said, I would like to go through the TA guidelines, and then please hold on with me because there are some very important teaching philosophies that I want to talk to you about, and I want to talk to you about how those link in to safety in the lab and some of the issues we've been having with a little bit of disorganization and chaos going on. Not bad, but we need to talk about how we can best take those situations and handle them in a positive way. Let's talk first about Lab 22, and I know we've already said a bit about this lab. Immunology is a big lecture, and so I know already that I believe Mitchell and Trevor have already asked for me to take on that lecture. I am more than glad to do so. I very much enjoy giving this lecture, and if you need my help with it, do let me know. Even if you wanted me to do part of the lecture while you took on another part, that's always a possible way in which we can approach this one. Do take note that there is some helpful background information given in this TA guideline that can sometimes, there's the poop car again. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so do take note there are some helpful things in here that will get you through the lecture, but also, again, as I mentioned in the last Punctibyte, writing on the board, taking some time to do some of your own research, all of those things are helpful for the immunology lab. Adding your own flair always gives the students a reason to engage and a reason to turn their attention to you. In terms of the cheesy demo on this, remember that if you want to do that cheesy demo, it's just colored water. The clear color represents type O blood, can give to anyone else but not receive from anyone else. The purple representing type E blood that can receive from anyone. So universal recipient. The right stain blood smears are what we'll do to look for white blood cells, and we'll have a whole collection of those different blood smears, and we're hoping that students can find, although not every white blood cell, at least a big representation of the most common of the white blood cells. So 3 parts to that: octoloni gel, the right stain blood smears, and the blood typing. One note that relates to safety on the blood typing that I think we see a little bit of lackadaisicalness when we head into the last few weeks of lab. I think it's very important to tell your students that although we are working with neoblood, and emphasize that we are working with neoblood because there is no risk of bloodborne pathogens, it's a good idea to tell them how they would want to work with real blood, wearing gloves, using extreme caution with that blood for bloodborne pathogens, and really using your best aseptic technique possible. And that's something that students tend to become very lax in that towards the end of the semester. And I know I made that announcement to some of the students about that tendency to become lax in safety, but I think that's something that we need to reiterate and reiterate in the last few weeks of lab, because they're very stressed and tired and there's a lot of chaos going on. Let's talk a little bit about Lab 23. And this is our water microbiology lab. I would like for you as TAs to understand the setup of the membrane filtration apparatus. I'm more than glad to show the demo for how to set that up, but I want you to understand how it's set up as well, and what can go wrong sometimes with that filtering apparatus, because if we have students with problems, it's nice for all of you to also be able to know how to help them with those problems. If they've got a problem with with wastewater treatment plant influent flowing through their filter, this can be pretty gnarly. So we want to make sure that they do get this set up correct. There's a lot of background information given in this TA guideline. At one time, one of my teaching assistants spent a lot of time rewriting this TA guideline. She was able to put in a lot of added material. For example, she talks a lot about non-tuberculosis mycobacteria infections that we can see in the biofilms that grow on pipelines. While these don't typically cause us problems, although if I haven't told you my story about aerosolized antigen from hot tubs, have me tell you that story, because something called hot tub lung can affect even those of us who are not immunocompromised, affecting those that are immunocompromised even more heavily. So these non-tuberculosis mycobacteria can be a huge risk for HIV/AIDS patients. So this is something to add to your story of water microbiology. You can also add stories about hepatitis B virus in certain water supplies. You can add stories about the Clean Water Act, do a little research on the Safe Water Drinking Act, and really tell your students the story of the importance of water microbiology and the access to potable water. Certainly not something that every country has, and we're very lucky to have it. So we'll be doing several tests on this water, and I would like for you to be very familiar with each and every one of these tests so that you can help the students differentiate in what their purpose is, and also what level of either qualification or quantification it gives as to whether or not there are fecal coliforms present in the water. Wonderful. Let's briefly talk about Lab 24, which is our soil microbiology. Remember that only Erin and Aaron will go on to this lab this coming time. But talking about soil microbiology is also probably one of the most important studies that there is out there, because the quality of our soil is honestly what dictates the quality of the food that we eat. And so it's very important to think about these tests. We will also be following up on the water during this particular lab, so they will be doing some of the follow-up tests, and that's something important for us to keep track of too, so that we can help them, for example, to look at their their fluorescence from the mug media, and take them back into the UV light to do that. But also talking about the soil microbiology, please make sure that you fully understand the nitrogen cycle if you do decide to give this lecture, and to be able to give a little bit of flair to that nitrogen cycle. Otherwise, it's just a boring presentation of a cycle, and students don't really understand why it is that it is so important. So you can think about adding stories about Haber and Bosch and the industrial fixation of nitrogen. You can think about adding stories about lightning and the natural fixation of nitrogen. A lot of things that can add flair to this. You can also think about adding stories about what happens if nitrate accumulates in water and how we see a lot of environmental justice issues with accumulating nitrate in water and being affecting mostly lower socioeconomic neighborhoods. Those are the ones that are hit the hardest by polluted water from excessive fertilization of industrial agricultural lands. Excellent. So very important lab. Some students will find that they have time to do their Winogradsky columns during the lab today. However, we have set aside time, and so let me bring up the schedule one more time. We've set aside a day in lab where, oh, just the poop car for fun. Let's go ahead and find our schedule again. There it is. And remember that this last lab, either skill tests or Winogradsky can be done during those dates. 23rd and 24th of April, but also if they can get their Winogradsky labs done earlier than that, that's totally fine. So remember that unlike most semesters, they can't do the Winogradsky on open lab of the week that we do lab 24 because that is Easter holiday. So we'll have to encourage them towards the next week if they don't get it done during lab 24. A little bit of organization on lab 24 could go a long way to helping them actually be able to observe their Winogradsky columns during that lab. And one of the things that you all need to do is to make sure that you have determined with your fellow TAs how you want to give extra credit for the Winogradsky lab. I would suggest having them turn in their lab notebooks and looking at their lab notebooks for the presence of full detailed notes on that, but also that you need to monitor that they're taking their Winogradsky column home. We require that they take that Winogradsky home in order to get the full extra credit points. Okay, that was a big mouthful of, I hope, a lot of action that's very helpful. While I'm still on the scheduling page, I want to remind you that we will be having the TA dinner on the 12th. That is this coming Saturday. So you can look forward throughout the entire week to having that TA dinner. It should be a really good time. And I don't know what I'm going to fix yet, but I will certainly let you know about that. Also, I absolutely need to know ASAP, that is like tomorrow or the next day, as to severe dietary restrictions. If there are things like you're vegetarian, vegan, gluten-free, I need to know all of those things so that I can get an appropriate meal planned for everybody, something that everybody will love. Great. I think, time-wise, the dinner will be at 6:45 p.m. And I live at 1303 Renshaw Street. So you basically drive north on 15th until you hit Renshaw, take a left. My house is on the corner of 13th and Renshaw. So easy to find. It's a blue duplex. That being said, we now need to talk about what maybe is the most important part of this Punctibyte. I'm going to couch this discussion in a discussion of teaching philosophies. And I know that for you returning TAs, you have already heard about teaching philosophies. It doesn't ever hurt us to revisit those, because with time, I hope that you are evolving your own teaching philosophy. But I wanted to use this discussion to allow us to talk about how we can take these philosophies and use them for good classroom management in terms of safety. So we've had some safety issues, and they've led to a variety of issues over the last week. And so I think we can use this as a good jumping off point for this. There are many teaching and learning philosophies, and the history of these teaching and learning philosophies is a long one. For many years, people prescribed to the notion of behaviorist philosophy. What that means is literally that it's the training the dog philosophy. It's essentially that if we can reinstill behavior in an animal, we will always get the same desired behavior every time we give the same cue. So, for example, every time we have students come into the lab, if after a given amount of labs, we encourage them to always go get their plates out of the bin, then they will always just do that when they come into the lab. So behaviorist theories are this idea that we can control the behaviors and that overt actions are a measure of learning. The problem with this is that it doesn't take into account any of the internal processing of information. That is, it doesn't take into account cognition. And so it's cognitivist theories that started to challenge behaviorism. That is, that we started to think with cognitivism that there might be inner thought that wasn't manifested as behavior. We all know this is true, right? I can be thinking to myself, all of this is bullshit, but I'm doing the action anyway. And that doesn't, it's not a manifestation of my learning, right? My behavior may not always be a manifestation of my learning. And sometimes we are actors and actresses, right? Very much so. So cognitivism is where I finally start to jump on board with some of the learning theories, not necessarily with straight cognitivism, but with social cognitivism. The idea that our environment contributes to our thinking and learning. And one of the ways in which this manifests in our teaching is that we need to think about ourselves as role models. So when we think about ourselves as role models, if we act and behave the way that we hope that our students will, then this may be a more powerful teacher than what we say. Our vocalisms may not necessarily be what our students are learning from us. And we know that, right? The do as I say, not as I do, it doesn't work. And so we need to think about ourselves as role models. And if we are aggressive, then our students are more likely to behave in an aggressive way. So that's something that we need to think about. My philosophy prescribes most towards a humanist philosophy. In humanism, this is the idea of treating our learners as whole thinking beings. In humanism, we're interested in the evolution of the person. That is the transformational experiences of the learner as a whole thinking being. We're not just thinking about changing their behavior so that they're good microbiologists that have skills. We're thinking about actually transforming them as people and allowing learning to serve as a mode of self-actualization. Actually looking at the intrinsic development of an individual as a learner. And this is where we start to get the idea of learner-centered teaching, and Carl Rogers is the man behind a lot of coining that term. So this idea of facilitating the development of a learner as a whole being. And I think this is a very important thing. And I think it's also what can help us to understand our learners in a better way by thinking about them as having many parts to who they are and not just our microbiology class. And sometimes when we can think about our learners in that way, it changes the way in which we approach them. It also instills a level of compassion for them. Constructivism is the next learning philosophy that I wanted to speak about. And constructivism is something that I do believe in, but that I use very cautiously. Essentially, this is the idea that despite how we present material, learners have an existing scaffold of knowledge in their mind, and they will build their own realities from that scaffold. And the reason that I'm very cautious about using this philosophy is that many teachers, many professors, use this as a justification for lazy teaching. That is, they sit back and they say, well, I'm going to sit back and watch the learner construct their own reality, because in fact that's what they're going to do anyway, so it doesn't really matter what I do. That's a real justification for laziness. Instead, I like to think about social constructivism and the idea that environment does matter to learners and that they do learn through dialogue. So if we can be a part of that dialogue, that is, they will be building their own realities, but if we can then contribute to the dialogue that goes back and forth and helping them to build those realities, we play a very active role in how they construct from their existing knowledge scaffold. So this being said, I hope that it helps you to think about ways in which we can change how we are instilling ideas of safety in students. Over the last week, I have literally rooted plastic tubes out of the glass discard. These plastic tubes in many cases have been full of sometimes pathogenic bacteria. Sticking my hand into the glass discard is not my favorite thing in the world. We have had to root through racks full of waste that have just been thrown in carelessly into the waste bin. And I have noticed that we have some of our wine bottles that are full of potentially pathogenic bacteria instead of yeast. All of these things are manifestations of student stress, right? and TA stress and my stress and stress of our prep people. And so if we can take a moment every day to try to make the classroom stress-free again, and however we can do that at the beginning of the hour to kind of decrease feelings of stress, and then recenter the students and refocus them and make sure that they take a minute to think about their actions and how they're affecting other people. Their actions are never divorced of us. So please, in a very nonviolent way, and let me explain what I mean by that. Violent language is the kind of language that is, you students need to do better, right? That's violent language. Instead, if we can say things like, please think about the people who have to pick up after you. That's nonviolent language, right? If we always use I statements like, hey, good job today, but I find that it works better if I do this. That's nonviolent, versus you're doing this all wrong. So accusatory language, that kind of thing, is not going to help us with improving on this problem. And we always have this problem in the last part of the semester, but I think that was particularly bad this last week. So help me out with that. I can't wait to see all of you this coming week, and I'm super jazzed for the TA dinner. Everything is just going to rock this week, and I know it, and I thank you for your help in making it so. So have a good rest of the weekend.